Hi, this is Mrs. Slauson, one of the Algebra 2 teachers, and I will be walking you through your Capstone practice test based on polynomials. So just to note, as you go through this test, which is online, you will be allowed to use certain calculators that will be provided for you on the computer. One of them is just a regular scientific calculator, so those problems are all marked with SC. Sometimes you're going to see GC, so you're going to be allowed a graphing calculator, and then you're going to see a few problems that have NC where you will not be able to use the calculator. So let's just get into it. The first problem, I am supposed to find the zeros. I'm supposed to solve. So I want to know what number for x, if I plugged it in, would give me 0 as my answer. So with three terms, I always try to factor first. So I need the factors of 2x squared. That would get me to this 2x, and as it turns out, this is not factorable. So since it's not factorable, you will be expected to use the quadratic formula, and you're expected to know the quadratic formula. It won't be provided for you. So with the quadratic formula, you need an a, that's 1, you need b, which is 2, and you need c, which is also 2. And then you can go into the formula. So it's x equals opposite of b, and then plus or minus a big square root. So I'm going to take this b right here and I'm going to square it. So 2 squared is 4, and then minus 4 times a times c, and then all of that's divided by 2 times a. So 2 times 1 is just 2. So from there, what I do is I go into the check mark, the radical, and I do the math. So you'll be able to go to your scientific calculator and do 4 minus 4 times 1 times 2. If you don't use the calculator, again, what it's doing is order of operations. It's just multiplying this and getting 8, and then having 4 and taking away 8, so that when you're done with that check mark, you're going to get the square root of -4. So this will not be one of the answers you see as a choice. You will be expected to simplify this. So first, 4 does have a perfect square root, and since it's -4, when I take the square root of -4, I'm going to get a 2i. And after that, you can simplify it a little bit further. What I can do is I have my students make a triangle and realize that you could take and divide all of this by 2. So when you're done, your final answer is -1 plus or minus I, because I'm dividing this by 2, this by 2, and this by 2. So that is the final answer for 1. So on number 2, I have the option to use a graphing calculator. So I'm going to switch over so that you can see what that graphing calculator looks like. It looks like this. So you're going to see a little toolbar where you can type stuff in, and over on the left side you're going to see a 1 with the x next to it, and this is where I'm going to type in my equation. So I've just tapped here, and this little toolbar will just pop up, and you can type it in with the keypad, you can type it in using the touch screen. So the first equation I'm going to type in is -2x plus 2. And then I'm going to go to my second equation. So I'm just going to tap where the second equation is, and I'm going to put in 2x squared minus 2. Now, if you need help typing things in as you're taking the capstone, just ask your Algebra 2 teacher, and she, because we're all females, will be able to help you. So the problem, even though you can't see it, says given that one of the solutions is -2,6, solve the system. And so we're going to use the graphing calculator. So the answers are in front of me. They are where the 2 points are missing, or where the 2 points are intersecting. And if you actually just go to where they are intersecting and tap, so I'm going to the upper left one, your answer is just going to pop up. So there's the -2,6. So I already have that answer. And so I will tap on the other one to see what that one is, and it's 1, 0. So when you're ready to write in your answer, there's going to be a very specific way you'll have to write it when you go into the capstone test, okay? So when you write your answer, you will be expected to write it in or type it in as an ordered pair. So it's not enough, that you just go through and you write down 1, 0. You have to write it in parentheses. So you'll have to type in parentheses, 1, 0, and close your parentheses. Your answer needs to look exactly like that, or it's going to be counted wrong, okay? All right, let's move on to number 3. So number 3 is what we are currently working on. You're going to find the remaining zeros, given that one of them is -2. So the idea is I can use my synthetic division, and I know that one of my answers is x is -2. And when I go through synthetic division, I should get 0 at the end. It's one of the zeros. So now what I'm going to do is just go to this part here, take the numbers, the coefficients in front, 1, 1, negative 14, and negative 24, and I'll go through my synthetic division. So I'm going to bring the 1 down and just start multiplying. So 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. I'm going to add up this column, get negative 1, and now this negative 1 is multiplied to negative 2, and I get 2. I'm going to add this up, and then I'm going to take negative 12 times the negative 2, and I get 0. So again, this means if x is negative 2, y is 0. It's one of your zeros. And now it also means that I have a remainder here, that this is a constant. This is x squared. So I'm going to rewrite it over here. And I'm going to factor this. So what are factors of negative 12 that get me to negative 1? And that's going to be negative 4 and 3. And then I can make my factors. As I tell my students, this is easy factoring. It's just x minus 4 and x plus 3. And now I'm going to solve what makes these equal to 0. So what's going to make x minus 4 equal 0? And what's going to make x plus 3 equal to 0? So if I just add 4 on the first one, there's one answer. And if I subtract 3 on the other one, there's my other answers. And so on the test, you'll just have a little box that you can type in, and you'll type in 4 for one and negative 3 for the other. And it doesn't matter which one goes in which box, but your answers are 4 and negative 3. Okay? And again, you would have a scientific calculator on this. You would not have the graphing calculator access. Okay? All right, moving on to number 4. So in number 4, after examining the form of the choices, decide which function is the best choice. So this is all about the shape and a bounce, wiggle, or cross. So what I notice first is, let's talk about the shape. What I tell my students is I notice that this is an upside down U. So that means my highest power has to be even, because it's an upside down U, kind of like a parabola, and that the leading coefficient is a negative number. So maybe it's a negative 1. And then the other thing I'm going to pay attention to is the bounce, wiggle, cross. So it's bouncing at negative 2, which means the factor that got me negative 2 is x plus 2, and since it's bounced, it was at a squared exponent. Here's another x-intercept, which means the factor that got me there was an x, and it crossed, so it's just showing up once. And that here's another x-intercept at 1, so the factor that got me there was an x minus 1, and it just showed up once, so it crossed. And so when I look at my answer choices, the first one right now looks pretty good, because I've got an x plus 2 squared, and I've got an x minus 1. As I go through and look at my choices, the factors definitely don't match here, and they definitely don't match here. So at this point, I'm going to narrow it down to A and C, and I'm going to be choosing C as the correct answer, because this negative is going to force that shape to be an upside down shape, meaning the end behaviors are negative infinity for both of them. So the answer for this one is C. So don't just focus on the x-intercepts, focus on is it a bounce, wiggle, cross, and which direction that shape goes. All right, number 5. So again, no calculator here if you notice. Which of the following is the graph of, and then I get my problem. So what I talked about with my students is, maybe, for instance, you want to write it out. So this first one could just be 3x plus 0. If you like this option of everything being in parentheses, we have x minus 1 twice, and then I have an x plus 2. So first I notice my x-intercepts, so what would make these 0? So you can set these equal to 0, and you're going to see that you're going to have negative 2, you're going to have x equals 1 twice, and then if I set this equal to 0, I would just get 0. So the fact that 0 shows up once and negative 2 shows up once means I should have a cross, and the fact that 1 shows up an even amount of times, I should have a bounce. So I'm looking for a bounce at 1. So there's a bounce here at 1, and there's a bounce here at 1. This one, there's no bounce at 1, so I'm going to take B out, and I'm going to take C out. So then I can figure out the other shapes. So I've got 0 at crosses, so here's a bounce, here it's crossing, and here it's crossing. And the same thing happens here. It's crossing, and it's crossing at 0 with my bounce at 1. So what's the big difference between the two shapes? The big difference is that on A, this is going up. That meant if this were in standard form, I would have had a leading coefficient that was a positive number. And since this is upside down, my leading coefficient would have been a negative number. And if you go through and just multiply the first term of all of these, you can see that your leading coefficient would have been, or I'm sorry, leading term would have been 3x to the fourth. So the fourth says it's kind of like a quadratic, like an upside down u, or a u, and this says that it's going to be a regular u. So I'm going to choose option A. All right, moving on. So given, then you got this problem, choose the answer that best describes it. So there will not be a calculator, can't type this in and look at it. So what we want to know are the end behaviors. So what's the shape going to be? And your leading term is going to tell you all of this. So this fifth power, first what I tell my students, all odd powers are some type of line. So this line is either going uphill or downhill. It's just that the higher the odd power, chances are there's some bumps along the way. So this is a line, and then this -2 says that my line is going downhill. So we just draw a downhill line, and then we kind of take a look. This is the left side of the graph, this is the right side of the graph, and the phrasing that they use is rises to the left, falls to the right, or so they use rises and falls. So what I notice is that it is rising on the left side and falling on the right, and that's just what I want to look for. Rises to the left, falls to the right is our very first choice. All right, moving on, number 7. If you change the function from standard form to vertex form, what is k? So this is this process that you know as completing the square, and so what your teacher would have told you is that we will put these x's in parentheses, and I don't know any teacher that doesn't do this, but we add an amount, and then outside of the parentheses we'll have our subtracting 10, and now we'll take away an amount. And we always take this number, we cut it in half, that's 3, and you get 3 squared is 9. So we're going to be adding 9 to this. And then what happens here is this set of parentheses becomes this x plus 3 squared. So what we have to do is figure out what is this k worth. It's minus some amount, okay? So if I just go through real quick to the problem and add the opposite, this becomes x plus 3 squared and then plus -19. Now the difference is the problem wants it as minus and I have it as plus. So if I basically went through and unadded the opposite, this would be x plus 3 squared minus 19. And this then would be 19 as my answer. K is 19. So be careful when you get your final answer, look at the original problem and look, how was it set up? Because here it's minus k, so it's minus 19, and that's what makes k 19. All right, so number 8, we are going to rewrite this from factored form into standard form. Standard form into factored form, and as it turns out, they've actually given us one of the factors. And there was a question or on your review or in your homework packets that would ask you, is x minus 6 a factor of the original problem? And you would find that out because you would take 6 from here and then you would go through and you would do your synthetic division. So in this original problem is where I'll take my numbers, but I'm missing a lot of the x's, so I'll have to put in some placeholders. So here's 1 for x cubed, there's 0 for x squared, there's 0 for x, and then the -216. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is bring down the 1. 6 times 1 is 6. Add up this column, that's 6. 6 times 6 is 36. Add up this column, 36. 36 times 6 is 216, and you get 0. And then what you would do is that's the remainder, that's the constant, that's x squared. And so now with x squared plus 6x plus 36, and that's matching ax squared and bx and c, I want you to tell me what c is. And so you would, your answer would be 36. All right, moving on to the next problem.